Hi there, everyone. That was Vice President Kamala Harris in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, at a site chock full of symbolism and history, miles from where George Washington crossed the Delaware River during the American Revolution. The Vice President making some history of her own today, building on what has been an unprecedented reach across the political aisle and the political divide, something people thought hardened beyond repair in this country until Kamala Harris's presidential campaign sprung out this summer. Republicans who have been left behind by the GOP's capitulation to Donald Trump and transformation into an arm of an authoritarian movement have flocked to her candidacy. She was joined by more than 100 Republicans. That includes former Republican Congressman and January 6 Select Committee member Adam Kinzinger and former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, both of whom had primetime speaking roles at her convention. The vice president's message to Republican voters today, looking to turn the page on the chaos of Donald Trump and his very explicit and specific plans now to rule as an authoritarian should he win in November. That's where we start today. Democratic strategist and pollster, MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher is here. Also joining us, professor of history at New York University, Ruth Ben-Ghiat is here. Chief political columnist and host of the podcast In Politic for Puck, MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilemann is here. John Heilemann, I start with you. There's something like a finger in the socket for me when I hear the Democratic nominee lifting up and celebrating the courage and patriotism of Mike Pence, someone who served loyally. I mean, if you can say one thing about Mike Pence, it's that he served almost sycophantically Donald Trump for all 4 years, except for 2 hours one day. And it is a day that led to a threat against his family. The mission of hanging Mike Pence was the chant heard around the world on that day. But it was Vice President Harris today who used these words about Republican Mike Pence. Quote, "Were it not for the courage and patriotism of Mike Pence." That was just a stunning thing to hear, John.
Well, certainly nothing, Nicolle, you would have heard for all that period of time that you talked about up until January 6th. And in fact, something you wouldn't have heard from Democrats even for a long time after January 6th. And I guarantee that there are some Democrats out there who feel uncomfortable about it now and don't love, were not happy to see Kamala Harris with Liz Cheney and are not happy to see her up there with Adam Kinzinger and not happy to see her praising Mike Pence. And yet any Democrat who is really committed to the notion that this election has existential stakes and that Kamala Harris must win this election should be applauding her for doing what she's doing right now, because we are in that phase of the campaign where, as David Plouffe, who's been out in public a little bit this week in a way that he almost never is, has talked about, the argument for how to get out of this, for how Kamala Harris rises above this deadlocked race and manages to pull it out, is on the notion that Donald Trump's ceiling is lower than hers. Hers is a little higher than his, just enough, and that in that gap between his ceiling at 48 and a half, and hers at 49 and a half, 50 and a half, in that gap, there are some very key demographics of available voters. And some of those are lapsed Republicans who do not want to vote for Donald Trump, never will, and she has not yet closed the sale with. And she's now trying to do that, and this is the way to win. But whatever you think about Mike Pence, this is the way for Kamala Harris to win the election. And I think every Democrat who doesn't like it has to hold their nose and say, all right.
That is, I'm sure, the case, Cornell. But I hear from as many Democrats who just want to see her win and want to see her win with the kind of mandate that has a coalition that may be of some effect should Kamala Harris prevail, as Joe Biden did in 2020, and need to have a bipartisan megaphone to call for calm in the country. I mean, it seems like not just a political advantage. I mean, her numbers among white college-educated men, not women, but men, according to the new Marist, but she's got 59% of them. And Trump has not even all of the rest, most of the rest. I mean, the margins that she's building up, and you know, it does look a lot like the Obama coalition. But speak to the points that John Heilemann is making about her embrace of her bipartisan and Republican support creates some cross pressures for her.
Well, look, I think I don't want to think of this in our actually partisan political terms, because I think too often our campaigns, like always our campaigns in our elections, especially at the presidential level, have been hard partisan contests. And I think historically what you see in hard partisan contests is, you know, speaking of that Obama coalition, right, that hard partisan contrast, 51%, right, at Biden, 51%. But I lean into something, Nicolle, that you and I have talked about many times on this show, and that is a different kind of coalition, right? That is the democracy coalition, that coalition that's for democracy. And I think when I hear this speech and I hear her lean in to reaching across the aisle and talking about Republicans and reaching across the aisle and praising Republicans and trying to pull Republicans in a very different way, and you see the number of Republicans who are coming out for her. I think she has a potential to have a coalition that, quite frankly, doesn't even look like the Obama coalition. It is probably even broader than the Obama coalition, right? Not which I thought, you know, if you look at, you know, Democrats' ability to win here, we've got 3 elections out of the last 4 or 5 elections where Democrats have gotten 51%, been able to get a majority, a little over 51% for Obama. I think if this coalition comes together, it's a big if this coalition comes together, it's more than 51%, Nicolle. You know, and I think it puts more places in play than either Biden or Obama could do in a typical conventional, you know, D versus R race, right? This is becoming something perhaps even bigger than a D versus R, but to something that you've been talking about a long time, and that is a coalition of those who are for democracy.
And Ruth, a lot of what I understand about how countries on the edge of the knife, the study of a slide to autocracy, is these edge of the knife moments, and the off ramps always, the successful off ramping always entails a bipartisan or a multi sort of party coalition that says no to that jump off the cliff into autocracy. Tell me what you see when you see the Democratic nominee surrounded by members who, as she pointed out, I mean, she said explicitly, normally, you know, to be surrounded by all these Republicans isn't something that I would do 19 days out from the election. But she made this point. Donald Trump is talking about using the American military to go after Americans. And you know who he's going to target? Journalists whose stories he doesn't like, non-partisan election officials who don't respond to his efforts to find more votes, and judges whose ruling he doesn't like. I mean, she's assembling a coalition of people who are against those things.
Absolutely. And it's actually really exciting to see, because we know from the study of successful confrontations with autocracy is you need that multi-party coalition. Now, we only have the 2 parties. And so what she's doing through first Republicans for Harris, and now having, over 100 Republicans on her side talking about crossing the line and country over party. Actually, to build on what Cornell was saying, what we're seeing is the assemblage in this campaign of a pro-democracy movement in America, because our democracy is threatened as it has never been before. And Vice President Harris was extremely eloquent about this. And it was very important to stop and think about that language of enemies within, because it's not just immigrants, it's not just journalists or judges, it's also political opponents. As she said, anyone who does not agree with Donald Trump or who criticizes him becomes an enemy. And it was also very important to cite General Milley saying that Trump is fascist to the core. And, this raises the specter of using the U.S. military for domestic repression, which is what the dictators I've written about, that's what they do. Pinochet and others. So this was a terrific speech, and she's holding the key with the country over party and the appearances with important Republicans to build a kind of coalition that has been said goes way beyond what has been done before, and in that sense is the answer to our current emergency.